Okay, so we're going to get started with exercise 220, which is the second half of exercise 219. In exercise 219, I asked you to build a two-room oasis of sorts, and then I told you that in exercise 220, we were going to start by cutting sections through it. This is the first time that you're experimenting with sections in Rhino. I think sections are very, very critical for you to really understand so that you can get the most out of your Rhino models in the first place. And I've also found that in the past, it's kind of the hardest for people to take it away, such that when they move on to 220 or 221, they always come back and say, wait a minute, I don't remember how to do the section. So we're going to try to spend a lot of time today working through it with a sample. We will come back and discuss sections at length a little bit later in the course too, so we'll double up so that you see how it works. Before we do any kind of major section operations, it's always useful to go ahead and do a file save as so that you have a copy of your file that you're working on, because some, if not all, of the sections will do things to your model that will permanently, let's call it, damage the 3D model. And so you want to make sure you do a save as so that you're not wrecking your original file. You can always go back to your original file. So I do have one here, and I'll go ahead and do a save as to make sure that it's a separate copy, and we'll call it live 2. And I'll go ahead and click save so that I'm working on this copy, and I can always go back if I don't like what I did. Okay? So as I pointed out, this is a very generic, basic little model. It's on a piece of topography, just so that we can see how the topography works when I cut through the piece of topography. It doesn't matter where it is or what it looks like. The point being, I'm just trying to show you how all of this works. So the first thing that we're going to start with is kind of the basic section commands, basically a simple line section. It's Rhino 5.25. And what I like to do just before I get too involved is I like to kind of visually see where my section is going to be. And so I create a vertical plane before I do anything else that will let me kind of determine where my section is going to be. So I will first off create a new layer, and we'll call this section, for lack of a better term, section 1. And then as a sub-layer, I'm going to call a section, so I'll call it S01 plane. And I'm going to draw a very large vertical plane that's bigger than my model. Let me create a vertical plane here. And actually I've got a bunch of extra information, so I'm going to draw, do it ortho, bigger than everything that I have on my site. Something like that. It looks like it assigned a material to it, which is a little bit odd. Let me go into its properties and make sure that it has... I didn't change my my default layer there. Okay, so I have this. I want to make sure that it definitely goes below my object too. So this is like a gigantic plane. I'm going to type move vertical, and I'm going to move it down so it clearly intersects everything in my scene. Okay. I'm also going to switch it back to regular shaded mode, and now I'm going to zoom in and kind of have a look at this. So right now, it's not in a place where it's actually cutting through anything. So let me move it backwards here a little bit. And let me zoom in toward my model. And let me move this. Some people like to see it in ghosted mode because that helps. This works for me. Move. And I'm just moving it until it cuts about through where I'm going to want it to cut through my building. Okay? Approximate. That looks pretty good. That's where I'll cut my section. I can see both sides of it. It's cutting right through that little hole. And I'm going to take the section looking at this side when I do it. Okay? So conceptually, I always like to have that plane there so I can see, hey, this is where I'm cutting my section. So that's the first step of things. So I have on my layers, I have section 1, and I have this big plane. And I can turn it on and turn it off at will. Okay? So the next piece of the puzzle, we're going to follow 5.25 to create a simple line section. And so this is about as basic as the sections get. And in order to do that, basically all I have to do is type the section command. So I'll start by typing section. There it is. It's going to say select objects for sections. Right? I want to cut a section through everything except that big plane. Right? Actually, I could probably lock that plane, but for now it's fine. And before we do the section command, let's create a new sublayer and put myself on that layer, just in case. Okay. So I selected the objects. Okay. The rest of these options are fine, so I'll go ahead and hit enter. Right. Start of section. Right. This is where if I created this plane to begin with, it's very easy for me to use that as a guide. So start of section will be here. End of section will be here. Right. And it will then cut through everything on my scene. And so if we look in a little bit closer, let me zoom selected right on this. Actually, it's not going to let me zoom in too much. Let me zoom. There we go. See how it cut through and it gave me lines everywhere that it cut through? Okay. That is a very basic section. So let me go ahead and move this out so that we can see it a little bit better. Oops. Sorry, I should type move. Okay. And get rid of a few of these little points. Obviously these lines don't matter so much. Look here. Zoom selected. Accidentally took this with me. Alright, so there's the section, for looking at it, of my building. Okay? It is technically the section. Not exactly the most attractive thing, but it could work in a pinch as a section. Right? It's basically what you've cut through. Okay? So let's take it a step further. I'm going to go ahead and rename this layer. We'll call this line section. And I'm going to create a new sublayer, and we're going to call this rendered segments, S01, R01, for lack of something better. Okay, so let me make that active. I can turn off that section because it doesn't matter anymore, and we're going to come back to this model. Okay, so there is a plugin, and I just want to make sure that I don't. Okay, I don't know that I. Good. I do talk about this. This is Rhino tutorial 5.26. There's a plugin that the people who make Rhino develop. It's really, really good for seeing sections and understanding how sections work, and dynamically changing them and updating them and even modeling while you're seeing a section. The problem is that the people who make Rhino are different from the people who make V-Ray, and the two of them don't necessarily get along, which would be nice if they did. I've actually had a lot of communication with the Rhino people, even the developers on the team, about this, and they say it's very frustrating because they've reached out to V-Ray many, many times to get them to do this, and they just don't do it. So we have a workaround. We're going to work through it. But in the meantime, I'm at least going to show you this because it helps you decide what your section looks like. And it's a plugin that's called SectionTools. And you'll notice up at the very top of your menu structure, there is a little menu that is called SectionTools. You can access most of the commands from right here. There are also key commands for this. So for example, SectionTools create is also stcreate. It's just another command. So I'm going to go up to SectionTools and I'm going to say create. And what it's going to do is it's first going to say select objects to section. Right? I'm going to type all to select everything. Okay. Then it's going to say, okay, so we go ahead and hit enter. I'm done. Then it's going to say press enter to accept options. But we need to look through these options. So first off, we've got a direction. Do we want the x-axis or do we want the y-axis? Do we want a different direction? The default is the x-axis. If I'm looking at the direction of my section, it's not going to be the x-axis. So I'm going to click on direction, and it's going to allow me to pick x, y, or pick. Right? I'm going to show you pick, though my section is in the y-axis, just so you're used to it. When I pick pick, it's going to ask me from point, and this is where this plane comes in really handy. From point to point. Why is it being really annoying here? It's probably because it's asking me, hold on one second, let me do it's looking for this to be on 0, 0. It's looking for it to be on 0, 0. So I'm going to select objects, all, direction, pick, and I'm going to check this box for project, which just means it's going to project everything onto the 0 plane. Okay, so I can pick from right there to right there, and it'll be a horizontal line. So the direction, it overrode it and said it is in the y-axis, so I could have picked that from the beginning. The only time that that pick really matters is if you want a section that's skewed, not an X or a Y. Okay, so anyway, so we have that. Do I want to replace? No. The name SEC is fine, right? Load from file. No, I'm not. Do I want the attributes by object? Yes, I do. Okay, now we get to solid mode. Okay, this one's also critical. Right now it's set to none, which means that when it cuts the section, it's not going to fill any voids with any solids. And so I'm going to change that. And you can choose to fill it with surfaces, with hatches, or both. I'm going to fill it with surfaces so that I can render that surface. Okay? So I have it set to surfaces. Labels, show all is fine. Arrow scale of 1 is just fine. Okay? So now that I've gotten to that stage, I'll go ahead and hit enter. Those are the options. And now you'll see that I get a bar, right, this red bar, that looks like a section line and it has little arrows on the end. Okay? Right now it's facing the opposite direction that I want it to. So I'm going to click on flip, and it's going to go back the direction I want it to go. Make sense so far? Okay. So now I'll come over here, and I'm going to select, right, somewhere on my plane. So I'll go ahead and select there, and it creates this little piece. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. Notice that I can create multiple ones at the same time. Right. For right now, I'm only creating one. So I'll go ahead and hit enter. And it will then build section, what it calls section 0, 0, and it'll give me a section 0, 0 layer that's locked by default. Okay? So it doesn't do a whole lot unless we turn off everything else. Right? So let's turn everything else off. Oops. Turn this off as well. Right? And if I zoom in here and we look, right, it built for me these surfaces, right, wherever it intersected. So it looks virtually the same as the section command that I just used, except this time it's building actual surfaces. It did also, because I selected all, build me a big surface here as well. So let's go ahead and turn these on so that they're back on. Okay. And so now, and I'm going to turn off the big section plane here for a second. No, that's because this is part of the section now. Okay, so let me go ahead and view this section. So if I go up to the SectionTools command, I can go to View, right, or type STView sections, and it's going to say Select Sections. Okay. If you have more than one, a lot of times it's faster to click on List so that you can select it. SEC00, and I'll say OK. And then it's going to say select viewport to enable this. Okay, so I'm going to type in perspective, which is the view I'm in, and I'll hit enter. And it will then temporarily clip my model, right, at that particular section. This piece is really, really annoying, so let me get rid of it so we can see it. Right, so it's temporarily cut that section. If I zoom in on my model, right, selected, okay, it's filled in what I've cut through, and I can get in here and I can kind of see what does it look like. Okay. Furthermore, I can orient my camera so that we can actually get a true section view of this particular model. Right. So, well, I'll come back to that orientation. This is technically a sectional perspective, but it gives me a good opportunity to kind of look at how things are working. Okay. Now the problem here is if I went to render and I started to render, I'd get the other half of my model back, which isn't what I wanted. I wanted to be able to get the section view, right? So it only works for looking at it in Rhino. It doesn't actually give it to me, right, in the rendering. That's where V-Ray and Rhino don't talk. Really annoying, okay? So all that being said, though, there are some advantages to doing this let's call it the old-fashioned way, because we can be a little bit more selective about how it renders. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to go back, and I can go to SectionTools, clear all views, and I get my model back. Okay, and this time what I'm going to do, let me turn back on my section plane. There it is. I'm going to do a giant split of my and this is where something that I do affects the overall model. So I'm going to do split, and I'm going to select objects to split. It's going to be everything, right, except for my giant plane, like that. I'll hit enter. Select cutting objects. It's going to be my giant plane, and I'll go ahead and hit enter, and it's going to go through and split. Now sometimes you'll run into trouble during the split. Usually it happens when you have objects that have been brought in as blocks. You may have to explode the blocks before you can do the split of those objects. So it doesn't hurt to go through explode. Remember, we're doing this on a file that we're willing to throw away. It's not your original file. So if we explode the boss and embed them in the model, that's not a problem. Okay, so I've now split based on this side, and let me turn off the giant plane here. And so this side is distinctly separate from this side now. Okay, so what I need is I need to be able to apply a material to this side that's transparent. Okay, and I could do a very basic transparent material and apply it, and then perform a rendering. So let me take all of these, and I'm actually going to do a quick save as. Let me do a save and then a save as, because I'm going to do one thing and then show you a different way of doing it, and I want to be able to come back to this step. So okay, so I'm going to go into my materials, and I'm going to create a new material. Load material, or excuse me, create a material. Actually, you know what? If you have access to the Q drive, it might already be here. Let me see. Which could save you. Yeah, we're going to come and load that in a second. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a material, and it's just going to be a standard material. And this is going to be, I'm going to call it transparent. And I'll say OK. And I'm going to make the transparency here white. So it's 100% transparent. And when I preview it, it's going to look like nothing's there. Okay? So I'll then take half of my model, right? And a lot of times it's actually easier to do this looking in one of the side views. No, wrong side view. Let me look in the front view here. Because I can drag through my building and pick one whole half. Okay? And we can confirm that it is picking one whole half. Obviously I can deselect the light because that doesn't matter. And I can go to my materials and I can apply material to selection. Okay? When I do that, if I go to render, and I'm going to render it in perspective so that we can see this here. And I go to render. It's going to render the section, right? Which is really nice. Okay. The problem here, this is exactly like the world of SketchUp when we cut a section in SketchUp, in that I have a giant hole in this half of the building, and I've got my sun shining in as if there were no other half of the building here. You guys see that stripe across the back from the roof? Not the best. Okay. So we're going to change that and do it differently. So I'm going to undo what I just did, I hope. Let me go back to my materials on all these, and instead of assigning by object, we're going to assign by layer. All right, and so if I were to render right now, let me turn this off. I just want to make sure that I did this correctly. If I were to render right now, everything should still have the materials applied to them. Good. And so if we're looking inside this model right now, and I apologize if the projector's a little bit dark, we can see that I should have these stripes on the wall from these windows. There's a reason I put these stripes in, so it's obvious when I do the rendering that it's working. So there's these little stripes that are there. Okay, these parallel stripes. We want those to show up in our section view. So let me come back here, and I'm going to load a very special material that's different than the other materials that we've used, and it's called a cThru material. And I walk through how you can actually make it. Though you all have access to it, you can either download it from the website or you can get it off the Q drive because I've made it for you already. So let me go to materials. I'm going to go to Scene Materials, and I'm going to load material. And under V-Ray, there's a folder called Special Materials. And inside of Special Materials, there's a material called cThru. And I'm going to load that cThru material. And so what cThru does is it's a material that looks transparent, but it's opaque to sunlight. Right? So it has complete reflection to sunlight, but it's not something you could make in real life. Right? But we're faking this material in V-Ray. And so V-Ray will treat the object as opaque to sunlight, but transparent to us as the viewer. Okay? And so there is a walkthrough on how you do it. It's 8.22 in V-Ray if you want to make it yourself. You can, of course, just download it. It's just a few different options that you have to check. Okay? Mainly, so the transparency is white, you have a refraction layer, you change a few settings, and you get there. Anyway, when we preview it, it looks exactly the same as the transparent object. It looks like nothing's there. So, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to apply that material to this half of the model. Okay? Now, if we're being very technical about it, there's a little bit more to it. Okay? So let's make sure I have absolutely everything selected here, right? And it would be really easy to just apply uniformly, right, all of this. Now, inside this view, however, I have some doors and some glass. Okay? If I apply the cThru material to the glass, we defeat the purpose because the glass becomes opaque. So we need the glass to actually be transparent still. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off, I have glass that's on several layers. I'm just going to turn off glass. So we're going to turn off the glass. I'm going to turn off the glass here. Make sure I don't have any other glass that's hidden anywhere else. Good. So I turned off the glass, no longer selected. Then I'll go to my material library and I'll apply cThru to selection. Okay. So if I were to render right now, go ahead and close this. If I were to render right now, the glass isn't on. So that, again, defeats the purpose. I want the glass to be on. So we'll come back and turn the glass on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to deselect everything, turn on both glass layers, and I'm going to right-click and say Select Objects so that I select the glass. I'm going to right-click and say Select Objects. So I have all the glass selected. It appears that there's a little bit of glass on this side that I don't want, so let me deselect the glass from this side. I'm holding down Control. Okay, so the glass is deselected, so I only have this piece of glass. I'm going to go back to my material library, and I'm going to use that transparent material that I created first, the completely transparent material, and I'll apply this material to my selection. Okay, and now I can go ahead and do a V-Ray render. So I'll set up my view, right, and we're again looking at it in perspective so we can see how it works, and I'll go ahead and render. And when I do my render, this half of the building appears as though the other half of the building is still there, such that I'm getting the shadows through the windows on the wall. Does that make sense? So this is a very technical, good way of doing a rendering of a building because the lighting conditions inside the building are accurate to the way I want it to be. If I had artificial lighting inside the building, same thing would happen. If I did a night section, right, I could do the same rendering because it acts as though the whole building is there. Okay, so let's take it a few steps further. It looks like when I'm doing this rendering, I have a little bit of a loop here where it isn't completely solid. So I'd like to fix that. Just like in the back here, I don't have a complete solid. So I need to fix those two pieces. So let's go into my SectionTools. and I'll go to STView. And this is just so that I can see it a little bit better. I want to view section 00, and I want to view it in perspective, just so I can temporarily see it. Okay, and then we'll come in here, and on the section 00 layer, I'm going to draw a little rectangle from here. Oops, let me turn off project, sorry. From there to there to there, there it is. And I need one more back here, so we'll go there to there to there. It gives me that other little piece. For whatever reason, it didn't create it, right? Likewise, it would be nice if I had a little bit more ground below the terrain. So let me take my terrain curve, and I'm going to look at it in the side view here, and I'll offset it, I don't know, like 100 feet, something like that. We'll go toward the inside. I'll select those two and loft them. Right. I don't really care that it overlaps. It's not too big of a deal. Let me select this upper curve, and I'm going to do the same offset, and then we'll loft these as well. So I'm missing a little bit. Let's do a little bit more surface here. Actually, I'll tell you what, let me just move this over. Give ourselves a little bit of hassle. Okay. So there's not really a right or a wrong. I'm just filling in some of that. Then I'm going to go to this section layer, and I'm going to change and make a material that's just a plain black. So let me create material, standard, we'll call it black. You could make it dark gray, it's up to you. I'm going to say black, and I'm going to change the color to be black. Okay. And now, if I were to zoom in on this particular piece and render it, it would help if I assign the material to the layer. Apply material to layer. Come on, B-Ray. And so now what I cut through is going to appear black, which is nice. Now, if aesthetically you don't want to see it as black, change it to be whatever you want it to be. The point being that I now have a material that indicates what the section cut is. Okay, so let's take it another step further. I might have to save this and reopen it because V-Ray's being cranky with me. Okay, so we're back to where we were. So I've been rendering perspective views of this object so that I can see it that way. In reality, a lot of times you're going to want to change the perspective view into being an elevation view. Now, because this is on the XY plane, I can use just my right view to do the section, right? I can use the left view to do the opposite. If you need to set up a custom section because it's tipped, there's a way of orienting the camera to a surface, and I can show you how to do that, but it's probably better for the advanced topic. For right now, we're going to stick with the standard view. So I have my standard view set up here, right? I center my object. Let me go in. Oh, thanks, Rhino. You didn't let me keep my V-Ray options. Anyway, let me go ahead and go into my V-Ray options. I'm going to adjust my output size, right? We'll keep the view aspect, that's fine. And let me bump up the size a bit. There. And then let me go ahead and do my render. And so we'll end up with an accurate rendering, including all of my V-Ray material. Right? And if you know Photoshop or you know Illustrator, you can combine the lines with this and give yourself a little bit more. We can extend this a great deal. For what we're doing right now, this is all that matters. This is all that I'm shooting for. But I'd really like you guys to get comfortable with how you can, this square here is a set of elevator doors. I don't know where the elevator's going, but they're metal. That's why it looks like it's shining a little bit too strong, so I might change the material. But this gives you a really nice idea of what the section looks like when you create it. Now, of course, you can cut a section the opposite way and see the same sorts of things, but this reads pretty well. The purpose today, even if you don't have terrain, is to be able to cut this section, get a nice strong section, and to have it rendered in V-Ray with your materials applied. Okay? Questions? All right. I think I'm going to turn you loose, let you work on it. If you get stuck, we'll talk about it. Remember, this is not the last time we're going to talk about sections, because I really, really want you to understand it and get it. Okay?